In the heart of the Andes, high above the clouds, lies a mystery so profound that it has defied archaeologists, historians, and even ancient mythologists for centuries. A civilization more advanced than its time, builders of impossible stone structures, engineers of perfectly interlocking megaliths, and keepers of a language never fully understood, once ruled this region. They left behind cities carved into mountainsides, but no scrolls, no books, no written records. Nothing. And here's the strangest part. They didn't just vanish. They chose to erase themselves. Temples were buried. Statues smashed. Entire cities methodically dismantled. And it was all done from within. Why would an empire so sophisticated destroy every trace of its identity? What were they hiding? And what truth was so terrifying that it had to be buried forever? This isn't just a tale of ancient ruins. It's a chilling descent into a cultural suicide, a forgotten genocide of memory, and a warning written in stone. What made the builders of the Andes turn against themselves? And what cursed knowledge did they try to take to their graves? Let's begin. They rise from the mountains like the bones of forgotten gods, walls of cyclopean stone, cut and placed with a precision modern engineers still struggle to replicate. At Sacsayhuaman, above the ancient city of Cusco, titanic blocks, some weighing over 120 tons, fit together like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle. Not a single blade of grass can slide between them. There is no mortar, no reinforcement, just weight, geometry, and impossible craftsmanship. Mainstream archaeology says the Inca built these structures. But the Inca themselves admitted they didn't. They inherited them. They called the original builders the ones before. And those ones before, they've been lost to time, on purpose. Further south, at Pumapunku in Bolivia, we find stone blocks carved with perfectly straight, machine-like edges. Deep precision grooves. Right angles that defy erosion and crude tools. The stones are made of andesite and diorite, materials so hard, they rival diamond. You would need diamond-tipped drills to achieve this level of detail today. Yet here they are, carved, aligned, abandoned. Even more disturbing, some blocks appear to have melted, as if they were softened, reshaped, then solidified. No fire could do that. No simple tools. No copper chisels. No rope and logs. So how did they build them? And more importantly, why did they stop? The highlands of the Andes are littered with clues to a lost technological understanding. Evidence that someone, long before the Inca, mastered geoengineering, vibration technology, and maybe even something more exotic. But the record is silent, because the ones who built these marvels left behind no writing, no blueprints, no burial chambers with tools or glyphs or anything that could reveal their origin. It's as if they built wonders and then wiped themselves off the map. One possible answer lies buried beneath Lake Titicaca. In the late 1990s, a team of underwater archaeologists discovered what looked like an entire city beneath the lake's surface. Stone roads, terraces, walls, and religious structures submerged for thousands of years. Older than the Inca. Possibly older than the Egyptians. And even there, no inscriptions. Just the bones of a civilization determined not to be remembered. What were they hiding? Why was it so important to disappear completely? Some believe it wasn't a war. It wasn't disease. It was choice. And choice always has a reason. As we follow the trail into the high valleys and abandoned cities of Peru and Bolivia, the whispers of those before the Inca grow louder. Not in text, not in song, but in the eerie silence of ruins no one claims. Because deep in the Andes, there is a myth passed down through generations, that the gods came down, taught forbidden knowledge, and when humans became too powerful, they turned on each other. It's a story of hubris, of punishment, of secrets that were never meant to be passed on. But someone tried to preserve those secrets, not in writing, but in symbols. And when decoded, they point to something shocking. Not from the heavens, but from within the earth itself. Something that demanded silence. The Inca were brilliant, no doubt. They conquered vast territories, developed complex roads, and mastered high-altitude agriculture. But even they stood in awe of the stones that came before them. Spanish chroniclers, arriving in the 16th century, were shocked to discover that the native people, who had no written language, possessed oral histories that traced their origins to beings of light, or engineers of the deep earth. These stories weren't just myths. They were warnings. The Inca priests spoke reverently of a race that once walked the land, giant builders with knowledge of stone, sky, and vibration. These weren't gods in the abstract. They were described as flesh-and-blood beings who taught humans how to shape mountains, read the stars, and speak through the rocks. But their knowledge became dangerous. According to legend, the pre-Inca engineers could command resonance, using vibrational frequencies to break and move stone as easily as clay. Some accounts speak of flutes or tuning instruments that made heavy blocks float, levitate, and fit together seamlessly without physical force. It sounds impossible until you stand in front of the megalithic walls of Ollantaytambo, where blocks weighing 50 tons each were transported across a river, uphill, and set into the side of a mountain without a single wheel. And still, no tools were ever found. The theory of sonic stone shaping has long been dismissed by mainstream academia. Yet ancient Chinese, Egyptian, and Tibetan texts also speak of similar feats, of monks using sound to move boulders, of lost instruments capable of reshaping matter. But the Andes are different. Because here, the people who inherited the technology did not just forget it. They were forbidden from using it. The chroniclers report strange rituals, ceremonies where ancient stones were feared, not revered. Children were warned never to enter certain ruins. Priests fasted before approaching the places where the engineers died. Some sacred sites were actively buried by hand, layer upon layer of dirt and stone, as if trying to keep something trapped. It wasn't just reverence. It was terror. At the Coricancha Temple in Cusco, once the most sacred site of the Inca Empire, Spanish conquistadors found that the Inca had gilded the walls with gold, not to decorate, but to seal something beneath. Beneath the temple lay underground chambers, tunnels that the Spanish were warned never to enter. They did anyway. And those who went deepest into the tunnels never came back. When the Spanish finally breached the temple, they were shocked to find massive stone doors, perfectly cut, leading nowhere. Some believed they were locked by vibration. Others said they led to chambers where something had been hidden long before the Inca arrived. Artifacts? Scriptures? Or perhaps knowledge so dangerous it had to be sealed for eternity. Over the centuries, whispers have surfaced of a codex, an oral record passed secretly among the native priests of the Andes. Not a book, but a living memory, handed down by word, gesture, and ritual. The codex tells of a time when humans began to reshape the world, not with machines, but with will. And when they overstepped, nature answered back, violently. This may explain why entire cities, like Tiwanaku, appear to have been frozen mid-construction, then destroyed in a single cataclysm. Not eroded, not decayed, but shattered, blasted, ripped apart with unimaginable force. Some believe it was a war. Others, a failed ritual. But the codex suggests something else. Something was released. And what followed wasn't just the end of a civilization. It was a deliberate decision to bury the knowledge, to dismantle the legacy, to vanish from history. And the deeper we dig into that codex, the more we realize this was no accident. It was a planned erasure. Because the ones who survived swore never to speak of what came before. It was never written in ink. No stone tablet. No ancient manuscript. The Forbidden Codex was a story passed mouth to mouth, generation to generation. A verbal virus buried in prayer, dance, and shadowed ceremony. And those who held it were both guardians and prisoners of the knowledge. Spanish missionaries tried to burn it, but you can't burn what's never written. Among the Quechua high priests, it was called Yachina Richai, the awakening of the knowers. It spoke of a time when the first men did not farm, or hunt, or worship. They engineered reality. According to the Codex, these beings discovered that the earth was not just matter, but resonance. That mountains could be carved not with tools, but with intention channeled through sound, motion, and ritual. That consciousness, amplified through geometric alignments, could shift stone, time, even memory. And that is the key. Memory. They didn't just build structures. They encoded conscious commands into the very stones. Stones that remembered. But over time, the engineers grew arrogant. They attempted to rewrite natural law, even trying to pull energy directly from the Earth's magnetic field through a network of sacred sites. What we now call ley lines, they called the serpent paths. It worked. For a while. But the Codex warns. He who wakes the serpent must also feed it. The serpent awoke. Massive earthquakes, floods, a sickness that came not from the sky, but from beneath. Whole cities swallowed. People vanished. The very earth rejected their tampering. The survivors faced a terrible choice: keep the knowledge and risk another disaster, or erase themselves. The decision wasn't unanimous. Some wanted to preserve the old ways. Others believed the knowledge had become a curse, something that would always tempt mankind toward ruin. So a pact was made. The elders, known as the Amaracuna, or serpent keepers, gathered the remaining engineers and dismantled their works. Cities were buried. Symbols were defaced. Temples were flooded. Sacred tools were cast into the volcanic pits of the Andes. And then, in one final ritual, they gathered in the highest chamber of what is now called the Temple of the Sun and sealed their minds. According to the Codex, a mass ceremony took place. The elders used a resonance chant so powerful it induced mass amnesia in those present. They gave up their knowledge, their memories, even their names. They chose collective forgetting. That's why we find no glyphs, no histories, no records. They didn't forget by accident. They chose oblivion as protection from themselves. But fragments survived, barely. In the 1940s, an ethnographer named Jacinto Rocha claimed to have been initiated into a secret oral lineage while living with the Caro people. They told him the story of the Amaracuna and warned that when the stones began to hum again, when people began to hear tones in sacred sites, it would mean the memory was waking. In recent years, tourists and researchers have reported strange phenomena at these sites: disorientation, high-frequency ringing, sudden emotion, even visions. One visitor collapsed at Ollantaytambo and claimed to see a city in the sky, floating above the clouds, glowing red and gold. These aren't isolated incidents. They're echoes, resonant signatures left behind, now reactivating. And they point to one terrifying truth: the erasure may be failing. The Codex warned that the knowledge would return when humanity once again grew arrogant enough to believe it could control the earth. And all signs point to one conclusion: there was no warning, no battle, no slow decline. According to the Codex and the oral histories that still survive, the end came in a single day. The day the earth swallowed its makers. It began with a vibration, not a sound, but a feeling, a low, humming resonance that rippled through the mountains like a heartbeat. The sky darkened at noon. Birds flew in chaotic patterns. Herds of animals fled their pastures without reason. And then the ground opened. Entire cities, those not already buried, collapsed into the earth. Stone temples crumbled. Sacred terraces split apart. Monolithic gates sheared down the middle as if struck by lightning. Witnesses described walls that melted and floors that breathed. But it wasn't just nature. It was retribution. In the shadow of Lake Titicaca, the city of Tiahuanaco, once a vibrant center of astronomical knowledge, housing thousands, was wiped out. Stone blocks weighing 100 tons were flung across fields, some landing hundreds of feet from their foundations. Others were buried deep in the earth, with no crater or explosion to explain their violent displacement. The Codex names this day Chaska Uyeyuna, the day the stars wept. It was not a punishment from the gods. It was the earth correcting a mistake. Because beneath the temples, deep in the vaults of the ancient engineers, the people had constructed what they believed to be resonant machines, harmonic amplifiers that could harness Earth's magnetic grid. These weren't just monuments. They were engines. The alignment of their structures, each precisely placed on a global lattice of energy, suggests the builders were trying to awaken something, or communicate with something, perhaps even ascend. And they nearly succeeded. But something went wrong. A misalignment. A ritual mistimed. Or perhaps the technology worked too well and tapped into something never meant to be controlled. The result was cataclysm. The resonance surged. The serpent paths, those invisible ley lines, twisted into chaos. The stones, encoded with memory and intention, unraveled. And everything fell apart. But here's what makes it even more chilling. They expected it. The engineers knew the risk. The Codex says the final ceremony was a fail-safe. If their grand experiment failed, a memory lock would be triggered, ensuring that no one could replicate their error. And so, in the aftermath, the survivors didn't rebuild. They did the unthinkable. They destroyed their own past. Cities were covered with earth, carvings defaced, statues broken, entire genealogies wiped out. The engineers were forbidden from speaking their names. The resonance tools, those that hadn't been destroyed in the collapse, were dismantled, scattered, or buried beneath glacial lakes and volcanic rock. It was a self-inflicted extinction of memory. And it worked. For over 1,000 years, no one knew who they were. Even the Inca, arriving centuries later, treated the ruins with sacred fear. They built around the old structures, not on top of them, as if they were afraid to disturb the bones of a sleeping god. Modern researchers have often attributed the collapse of these pre-Inca sites to earthquakes. But no single quake could launch multi-ton blocks through the air. No natural disaster explains the precision destruction, targeted erasure that only makes sense as intentional sabotage. And no accidental ruin leaves behind zero human remains. That's right. In the heart of Tiwanaku, despite all the collapsed temples, all the scattered monoliths, there are almost no bodies. Because they weren't just wiped out. They erased themselves before nature could finish the job. But the earth never forgets. And neither do the stones. In recent decades, a quiet reawakening has begun. Patterns in the layout of these sites, long thought decorative, are being reinterpreted as mathematical keys. Cymatic experiments show that certain frequencies cause sand and water to form patterns that match the carvings on pre-Inca stones. Were they trying to teach us something? Or warn us? Either way, we may be getting too close again. And this time, there may be no one left to lock the memory away. They had no armies, no executioners, no fires, no blades. And yet, they committed one of the most complete cultural assassinations in human history. The memory killers were not invaders. They were survivors. The final generation of the pre-Inca engineers, the ones who lived through the cataclysm and made a single, terrifying choice: to eliminate everything they knew. In the Codex, they are called Rikwikuna Mana Kilkakuna, the seers who do not write. Their mission was clear: to erase every trace of the knowledge that nearly destroyed their world. They moved from site to site in the darkness of night, not as builders, but as unmakers. Stone by stone, they deconstructed sacred geometries. They smashed resonance stones, defaced symbolic carvings, and sank tools into bottomless lakes never meant to give them back. They performed ceremonies to sever ancestral memory, rituals meant to unlearn what had been passed down for generations. In doing so, they became ghosts, keepers of oblivion. And here's the part that chills historians to the bone: they succeeded. Today, we know more about the Egyptians than we do about these mountain engineers. There are no names, no rulers, no known language. Nothing survives except the ruins, and the ruins don't match the people who inherited them. The Inca, who had no wheel, no iron tools, left behind brilliant but rudimentary architecture. Their work is often found sitting on top of impossibly complex foundations. Walls of mortar and small stones stacked above massive, interlocking megaliths that defy explanation. It's a silent testimony. The Inca respected the old builders, but never tried to imitate them. Because they couldn't. And maybe they weren't supposed to. The memory killers passed down a single lesson, hidden in folklore, myths, and quiet dread. Some truths are not meant to be remembered. But memory is a funny thing. It doesn't die. It waits. And in recent years, it has started to stir. Satellite imagery has revealed massive geometric patterns in the Andes, site alignments that span hundreds of miles, suggesting an ancient planetary grid. Underground scans have found chambers beneath Sacsayhuaman and Coricancha, still sealed, untouched for centuries. And then there's the music. In 2013, acoustic engineers tested the sound properties of these ruins. At several key sites, like Moray, Ollantaytambo, and Taipan, they discovered something astonishing. The stones amplify specific frequencies. Not randomly, by design. Some frequencies triggered physical responses: dizziness, euphoria, fear. Others produced visual distortions. And one frequency, 111 Hz, consistently induced a state of deep meditation and altered consciousness. That frequency is found at ancient sites across the globe, from the Great Pyramid of Giza to Newgrange in Ireland. And it's encoded into the very stones of the Andes. The question is, why? Some believe these sites were not temples, but machines, tools for spiritual transformation, or perhaps even communication with something beyond human understanding. Others fear something darker, that these frequencies were part of an ancient control system designed to manipulate thought, emotion, or even memory. And the deeper you dig, the more you find alignments, vibrations, patterns, all pointing to a civilization that didn't vanish by accident, but by design. Because the engineers knew what they had done. They saw the cost, and they swore a blood oath to stop history itself. But now, we're rebuilding it. Archaeologists keep digging. Technologists scan the stones. Tourists hum into the sacred chambers, unaware that the vibrations they create might be waking something long buried. The memory killers are gone, but the memory itself is not. And if they were right, if some knowledge is too dangerous to hold, then we are on the brink of repeating the sin they gave their lives to erase. Because in our thirst to know the past, we may be resurrecting the very forces that destroyed it. We often think of history as a long, winding story told through ruins, books, and bones. But what if the most important histories are the ones deliberately erased? What if the greatest truths were not lost, but buried alive? In the high Andes, among shattered temples and humming stones, echoes of a civilization still pulse beneath our feet. They were masters of matter, architects of resonance, and perhaps prisoners of their own creation. They touched something ancient, something beneath, and it cost them everything. They chose silence over survival, oblivion over remembrance, because they believed the memory of their knowledge was too dangerous to exist. And yet, here we are, digging, probing, awakening. We're asking the same questions they once asked, following the same patterns, standing in the same sacred chambers, where the stones still remember. But this time, there are no memory killers to stop us. So, what will we do with the knowledge they tried to erase? Let that question sit with you. If this story shook you, if it opened a door you didn't know existed, subscribe for more dark truths and forbidden histories. Leave a comment. Do you think they were right to erase themselves? Or should we uncover everything, no matter the cost? And if you're ready for another shocking story buried by time, watch this next. Because the past may be dead, but it's not done with us.